It got really quiet in here, so that must mean that we should go ahead and get started. So I'm gonna do that. We may have other people that are joining us this morning, and just so you know, we'll have them coming in through the doors in back. I know all of you, but just to reiterate for those that are joining us via live stream, welcome. My name is Jen Jelly. I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota chapter of the ALS Association, and I'm thrilled that you're all here with us this morning. This is the third and final event in our Gayle Sit Memorial Summer Speaker Series, and it has been so thrilling to have people join us in June and July to talk about topics that are really critical to the ALS community, and it's just great to be able to do this in our new space. We moved into this space in February, and it is already changing the way that we serve the ALS community. Not only is it accessible, but it's centrally located, and it's given us a lot more room to operate and engage with those that we serve. This room that we're sitting in is part of a multi-year initiative to really enhance our engagement with the ALS community. So you might notice that it's outfitted with a lot of technology, and that's so we can do things like video conferencing, webinars, demonstrations, live stream, all to support our core programs and services. And ultimately, so that no matter where somebody is in our service area and no matter what their mobility challenges may be, we can engage with them. This space has also allowed us to bring people into the office more. The room that we're in right now, we now host our support groups in, which allows individuals and families to engage with each other. And it's allowing us to bring you all here. I mean, we've had more people with ALS through our doors in the last 6 months than ever before. And that has been just a real awesome thing that we're able to do. Like I said, today we've been highlighting our major core areas of our mission. So in June, we had a conversation about research and advancements in gene therapy. In July, we focused on innovation in ALS care. And today we're going to focus on advocacy and how important that is in achieving our mission. So we have 3 guests today. And before I introduce who they are and get into the mix, I do just want to point out a couple of housekeeping items. If you need to use the restroom while you're here, if you could go out the doors in the back, and there'll be signs directing you there. And please don't hesitate to get up and get a Danish the size of your head while we're here. That is totally appropriate. We're going to do Q&A at the end. So after all of our speakers speak, we'll facilitate a Q&A at the end. So just so you're aware of that. So I'm so thrilled that we have the 3 people here that we do. First, we'll be hearing from Calaneet Balas, who is the president and CEO of the National ALS Association. After her, we'll hear from Matt Gallivan, who is the Director of State and Regulatory Affairs at 3M. And then we'll hear from Don and Candy Howard, who attended our Advocacy Day this year in Washington, D.C. But first, I'm going to introduce Calaneet. So Calaneet has been our president and CEO since December of 2017, but she joined the organization in June of 2016, leading all of our mission areas throughout the country, so care services, research, and policy. And she's also awesome, and I'm so happy that she's here with us. She's also from the Midwest, albeit Iowa. But she's still practically family, so we're thrilled to have her here today, and I will turn it over to Calaneet.
Okay. Thanks, Jen. And yes, Iowa, it's not that far. And I told Jen earlier I didn't know that it was even possible to have a slight dig on Iowa, because usually in Washington, when you say you're from Iowa, they're like, oh, that's so sweet. Potatoes, right? No, it's not the potato state. Well, thank you for having me here. I've been spending the last day and a half with the team here, the staff, some of the board members. And I've shared, and we'll get into some of this in a second, but I've shared with many people that you should be really proud of this chapter. And I don't say that lightly. We have 39 chapters across the country and 2 territories that we work with. And I have a very strong belief that this is one of the strongest chapters that we have, period. in the country, and you should be really proud of the work that you do here and how you participate and work with your team, because they are stellar and they should be held up and shown to the rest of the country. So thank you for letting me come and be a part of your family for a couple of days. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about advocacy, and I know several of you have attended the Advocacy Conference in Washington, D.C., so some of this might be a little bit of a repeat for you, but we'll get to Q&A at the end of the program, so if you have questions, please feel free to hang on to those and we can get a little bit further into some of these topics. But I just want to give a little bit of a commercial for the Advocacy Conference. Again, you all had an amazing cohort of, I think, 40 people that came to Washington, D.C. last year. This is one of my favorite events that we do, because you just get to meet so many people, not just going to Capitol Hill and being a part of, really pounding the pavement in the halls of Washington. But last year we had, I think, over 600 people attend the Advocacy Conference. Over 130 people living with ALS flew in from all over the country, which is just amazing. We've never had that many people, and we sold out. Literally, the fire marshals were like, no more. We cannot fit any more people in here. So that is great. We want to keep that momentum going. So I hope you'll look at your calendar for next year and join us again, because it never stops, right? We always have to keep fighting for everything I'm about to talk about and things that are going to come into the future. So I wanted to introduce you to our team. It is small but mighty. We have 4 people on staff in Washington that really do the bulk of the work, led by Kathleen, and then Abram, Ashley, and Adam. They're very, very dedicated, awesome policy wonks. And they're also led by Neil Thacker, who's our Executive Vice President of Mission Strategy. He actually took my position that Jen was just talking about, and he's brilliant. So I have some contact information up here. These slides can be shared with you, and please always feel free to reach out to the team in DC. They're here to listen, to help, and to help navigate. So that's why we're here. So please don't hesitate to talk with our team. So we've developed some guiding principles on how we approach different policy and policy issues. So first principle is to protect and expand access to healthcare, benefits, and services. And the reason we look at these things this way is there are so many topics that come to us, and we have to decide, is this something that we're going to take on? And these are some of the ways that we make those decisions. Like, is this something that we're responsible for? Is this something we want to do in coalition? And does it meet our principles? The second is to preserve and increase support for ALS research. This will never go away until we find a cure. We will always be advocating for research dollars, and we can never assume that those dollars are just going to come because they came last year. I've been in Washington 15 years. I know Matt will speak in a little bit, and we have probably both seen when those dollars have dipped. So that advocacy is very important, even though it might feel repetitious every year. Fight for people living with ALS on a wide range of issues. It's not just about research, it's about access, it's about treatments, it's about care. Some things are pretty nebulous and you wouldn't necessarily expect it, but we want to make sure that our vision is very wide on what's affecting people living with ALS and their caregivers. And increase resources and support for families, caregivers of people with ALS. I think they're pretty basic, but they're our guiding posts of what we do. So this year, and again, if you were at the conference and if you're involved in advocacy, these topics will not be a surprise to you. We have been working for the last couple of years to try to waive the 5-month waiting period for Social Security and disability. And I think I had a very nice conversation with one of your board members last night, and he felt like, went in the first year and said, okay, let's pass this bill. We're done, right? We got it done. Actually, no, usually it takes somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 7 years of tenacity to get a bill passed. So, depends on how you feel about it, but I think in some ways people think, are you really serious? Are you going to come back? Is this really an issue? Let's see, right? And so there's a lot of issues out there, so we have to be tenacious and understand that, yes, we have to keep going back until this passes. We have seen a really big uptick in support this year, meaning we have a lot more members that have signed on and more members on both sides of the aisle, including in the House and in the Senate. So I believe that we're getting very close on this. So keep up the good fight. This is very, very important. Non-invasive ventilators. This is something that has popped up as a new issue this year. We had a similar issue with complex rehab technology a couple of years ago, where there was a suggestion to make it available for competitive bidding, and that's a real issue. And obviously, with ventilators, this is incredibly important. It's important that someone is not at risk of losing a ventilator, depending on where they're located and depending on the bidding issue. Again, this issue has seen a great swell of support. Once you all went into Congress and really explained it to somebody, that a ventilator could be removed from somebody who needed it, it became very obvious to a lot of members that this is non-negotiable. This is not okay. So I believe that we will win this issue, but I'm not giving up until we've won the issue. So this is something that we'll keep straightforward on our agenda. And this just came up, the first time I heard about it, I think was the beginning of February. It just kind of one of those issues that just came out of nowhere. That's why you have to keep focused, because you're not necessarily expecting things. So at the bottom, you see that remove non-invasive ventilators from competitive bidding. That's our goal. Yep. And then research. So there are two programs that we make a big fight for every year. One is under the Department of Defense. It's called the CDMRP program. It's Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program. ALS is actually one of probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30 disease areas that get dollars for research through the Department of Defense. ALS is the only disease that actually has a tie to service in the military. So we have a very good reason to be asking for these dollars. This is different than the NIH program. You can think of DoD as kind of a high-risk, high-reward approach to research, and NIH is a little bit more basic and steady as you go type of research. So these are not the same types of programs, and sometimes you'll hear legislators or some of their staff say, oh, well, why don't you just move it over to NIH? It's just not the same program anymore, and this has been around for 25, 30 years. This year, we asked to double the amount of dollars that were in that budget. It has been $10 million for several years. There's some members of Congress that are no longer with us anymore that have been a barrier to potentially expanding that program. So this year we kind of took a roll of the dice and said, can we now get some more dollars in? It has passed in the House, and we are waiting for it to pass in the Senate. The Senate is always kind of the, sticky wicket there. But I'm pretty confident. I'm not 100% confident. So we're going to keep pounding the pavement on this one too. But I'm very excited that the House passed it with no question, and that's big. That does not happen in this program. And then the CDC Registry. Many of you might be familiar with the registry. It's actually a very uncommon thing in the disease space. There aren't a ton of these types of registries that exist, actually only a couple. And I think there's a little bit of a misconception that the registry is just about counting the number of people living with ALS. It's not a perfect system by any means, but actually the registry also provides a lot of research funding. So I don't know how many studies are being funded right now, probably in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 that comes from these dollars as well. In addition, they do surveys. So right now there are 17 surveys that are active with the CDC registry, and all of that survey information is an open data source, which means our researchers can then come and get that data and start mining that data and looking at it. It's really, really important when we're trying to figure out how this is happening, where this is happening, who is this happening to, and all those different nuances with it. In addition, the registry does a couple of other unique things. One, it provides a matching opportunity for anybody doing clinical trials. So, for example, Cytokinetics has a phase 3 clinical trial. They can reach out through this system and reach out to the thousands of people that are already registered and say, here's a clinical trial. are you a good match for it? Are you interested in joining it? And start to actually recruit for clinical trials through this program. It's been very successful and very helpful, not just for pharma, but also for universities and academics who are trying to recruit for clinical trials. Huge. And recently, about a year and a half ago or so, they started doing a biorepository. So they are also doing biorepository across the country and doing postmortem collection. And again, all of that data is open source. So it's really important because it's not under lock and key, and it's not a paid data source that somebody has to come and get. So when you're thinking about like startups or smaller academics who are trying just to get data and information, and they don't have a whole lot of money to start paying for data that's behind a paywall, this is an incredibly important research support for them. And NIH, I don't think I have to go into that too much, but obviously research, NIH supports more research in ALS than anywhere else in the world that's not private, right? And the real interesting thing here that you might not know is as the ALS Association has been able to increase its funding into research, we've seen a significant uptake in the amount of research dollars that the NIH is putting in. So our money is actually leveraging more money into the public and private sector, and it's not insignificant. I think it's about 3 or 4-fold. So this is now we're at $83 million. I can't remember what it was exactly right before the Ice Bucket Challenge. I'm happy to get you those numbers, but it's not just what the government improves. Then what happens is new researchers come into the space, and our dollars help to improve their research studies. And then when they go to apply for NIH money says, yeah, that's a pretty good study. And so now they're actually increasing the amount of dollars that are being spent at the NIH and ALS. So we're really excited about that, and we want to keep that going. All right. So just some of our big hits. If you're a policy wonk and you think it's fun, I do. So we have a VA service connection benefit. So that is, again, a very unique, actually a unique thing that does not exist anywhere else right now. I've been talking to other organizations to see how they might be able to get a similar service connection benefit. We don't know exactly why people who serve in the military have a higher incident of ALS, but we know that they do. And so this also helps us get those research dollars to try to figure that out. The Medicare 24-month waiting period was eliminated. Now we're going for the big gun, right? And trying to get that 5-month eliminated as well. The DoD research program, the registry, NIH support. And the last, but certainly not least at the bottom there, is that we made permanent access to speech-generating devices. You might have remembered this with the Gleason Act. So we worked very closely with Team Gleason, with legislators on the Hill, to make sure that this provision, which was supposed to be sunsetted, it was a short time-bound period, now will not be sunsetted. It will live in perpetuity. And just wanted to highlight some things. We address issues because they come in various forms. So it's not necessarily just the 4 or 5 people sitting in Washington that happen to see an issue come across the table. Many times those issues come to us through the chapters or things that are happening on a local level. We also work with a lot of the chapters across the country when they're trying to look at state legislative issues and help them maybe create toolkits or think about having a state legislative day. So if that's something that this chapter or organization would like to be a part of, we're always happy to try to help that out. We don't have an enormous amount of bandwidth to actually come and do all of it, but we have a lot of tools and resources that can help support. But again, a lot of the issues that we find out about sometimes come from the chapters. When the ventilation issue came about, I felt like it was a cacophony. I started getting emails from all over the country, and I'd actually happened to be at a meeting and heard it. I think it just all exploded in the same week. But it's very possible that I might not have been at that meeting. And so it was very good that we started to hear issues locally or what other people were hearing locally so that we could start to address them nationally. And Jen asked me to talk a little bit about the future. Sometimes it's hard to tell. You don't necessarily know what the crystal ball is going to give you, but I can tell you what we're doing now. So we have started a program called ALS Focus. It was birthed out of a program called ALS Prefer or Preference. We work very, very closely with FDA and CDC, this program in particular with FDA, and asking people, what do you want? What do you want in drug development? What do you want in complex technology? What do you want in therapy? What do you want in access? Not just making an assumption that people at FDA or people sitting on K Street in Washington understand that. So we're doing a variety of different reports with FDA, a lot of surveying, and very exciting and influential stuff. These three things that I listed under here, under focus, I don't know if there's a pointer here, but enhancing home health, reducing time to diagnosis, and alleviating caregiver burden. We recently did a roundtable in DC, and that roundtable wasn't really round. It was actually quite rectangular. There were like, I don't know, 40 or 50 people, so that's hard, you know, in a round. But those 40 or 50 people included people who were from FDA, who were from Cytokinetics and some of our pharma partners, people living with ALS, caregivers, some chapter staff, OTs, PTs, all over, to try to do a big 360. And we spent a lot of time before going into that meeting trying to figure out what might be some of the things that the ALS Association needs to focus on into the future, and how do we actually work with all of these different partners, whether they're researchers or whether they're agencies, to help us address them. So we spent an entire day just talking about these three topics, and we are producing a white paper, which is really just a guidance for us to start thinking about how do we address them and how do we work with the people that were in the room or some of their partners. This program has gotten a lot of enthusiasm from all of the people I just mentioned. So we will continue that forward. Probably we're doing another roundtable, I think in October, at the end of October, which will address some other issues as well. The future also holds access to therapies. I've spent a lot of time talking with your team. This is probably the thing that keeps me up at night right now, because we have more drugs in phase 3 and phase 2 clinical trials than we ever had, which is exciting. And we have more drugs in phase 3 and phase 2 clinical trials. And when those come to market, I want to make sure that people actually can get them. I want to make sure that they're affordable and that payers are going to pay for them. And we've seen recently a lot of drugs that come that have really high ticket prices, right? So it's about how do we work with that? How do we work with our pharma partners to address it? How do we work with payers to address it? And then actually, do we have the infrastructure in our clinics to deliver? So this is something for the future that we will be focused on in DC a lot. And then access to care. Again, more people living with ALS, that's exactly what we want, which means more people that need service living with ALS. And so how do we make sure that everyone has really high quality access to care, no matter where you live in this country? And that's I always say it's one of my burning platforms, is no matter where you are, whether you're in North Dakota, Manhattan, Florida, New York City, Chicago, you deserve the same treatment to access to therapies and care. And so that's why this is really, really important. And then the last, but certainly not least, telehealth. This is something that has been bubbling up, not just in ALS, but again, across disease communities. And telehealth is so important because sometimes it's just impossible to get to clinic, right? And if these treatments and these therapies do come online, that access is going to be really important. I was so excited when I came in here and big screen, and I think Mike was telling me that we want to be able to zoom somebody in, look at a device, tell us what's wrong with the device, and then we can walk them through how to fix it in 5 minutes. Then they don't have to come to the office, right? They don't have to come to a clinic. So that's an easy piece. But when you're talking about telehealth with physicians, how do they get reimbursed? How do they get reimbursed for their time? I know there's one physician right now who's trying to do a clinical trial through telehealth, which, through telemedicine, which I think is amazing. If you could do a clinical trial remotely, that would be a huge thing for people. So this is definitely part of the burning platform as well. All right. I think that's all I have to share with you today. I look forward to your questions a little bit. Turn it back over to Jen.
Perfect.
All right.
Yes, and I think Mike's going to swap out
the mic
to Matt.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Calaneet. That was great, and hopefully, like I mentioned earlier, we'll do some Q&A at the end. But now I'm going to introduce Matt Gallivan. So Matt now is rightfully back in his home state of Minnesota, working for 3M, but we actually met him for the first time when he spent over 8 years on the Hill in Washington, first working for Congressman Eric Paulson from Minnesota, and then Senator Cassidy from Louisiana, but all with a focus on health policy. And Matt has been extremely helpful to our chapter and a really amazing advocate for the ALS community. So I'm thrilled to have him back in my state, though I did really like having him on the Hill because he always did whatever we asked. So that was always really nice. But I'm pleased to welcome Matt. Come on up.
Thanks, Jen. Hello, everyone. Great to be with you here today. I'm sure some of you are thinking, what could a 31-year-old really tell us about how the government works or what to do with advocacy? For any of you who've been out to DC, you quickly realize that the dirty secret is the government is run by 25 to 35-year-olds. It's a little scary. So we've got the Vikings training camp going on. I was kind of like the Robert Smith of Capitol Hill staffers, where I was there for 8 years, but sort of retired at the pinnacle of my career and left to come back home with still some gas left in the tank, but just a little tired of the partisanship out there, shall we say. I think the most important thing to realize is that despite all the noise and despite all the frustration and partisanship and that it takes, 5, 6, 7, 10 years to get something done, that your advocacy actually really does make a difference and makes a difference in people's lives. And I've got just a few lessons from my experience that I'll share with you. Hopefully it's helpful to just keep in mind about the process and despite the frustration you might experience as you're going out and doing this advocacy, to just keep it in mind about how to be most effective out there. But it really does make a difference. I'll use an example to describe this. It was one of the last examples on there, which was the Steve Gleason Act. And when you go out to DC, most people want to meet with a member of Congress. And I worked for 2 really good members. Both were hardworking. Both are incredibly smart. Both were a little bit in the minority where they actually care about healthcare. One thing you find when you go out there is 95% of members don't know anything about healthcare. You're lucky if they know the difference between Medicare and Medicaid, or they actually know what Part A and Part B and Part C and Part D are within Medicare. That is common that they don't. Their schedules are mapped out in 5 and 15-minute increments. So normally if you get to meet with a member, they come in, they're huffing and puffing, they're already 20 minutes behind schedule and it's only 9:15, and hopefully they're engaged in paying attention. Many of them are generalists. They're trying to know all these different issues in all these different areas. So some people get disappointed when you go out there and you maybe don't get a meeting with a member. That's not a bad thing. The members are great, but really the people you want to meet with and develop a relationship with are the staffers. Jen talked about a perfect example. We were able to work together over many years. There can be a lot of staff turnover, which creates an issue in building those relationships. That is one of the biggest hurdles. But building that personal relationship with the staffer is what allows you to maximize your success. And so the Steve Gleason Act, as an example, it was ALS advocates coming out, meeting with us, and saying, hey, this is an issue that's popped up. Medicare is denying our access to speech-generating devices and eye-tracking technology and trying to put a rental cap on it and all these things. And it was that conversation that started the ball rolling. And because myself and a few other offices had these relationships with advocates that had developed over multiple years of meeting and getting to know each other. where there was that sense of trust on the issue. When you all bring an issue forward, it is well researched, it is truly an issue. And that's not always the case. There are a lot of people that come and are not really effective at advocacy. So then what happened is we started getting to work. And one thing you have to realize is legislation isn't always the answer in solving an issue. So the first thing we actually did is we wrote a letter to CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And we got a group of members together, and by writing a letter, we addressed half of the issues that were being raised, because we just got a bunch of members to send a letter saying, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. This is crazy. And so just like that, you take away the angst of having to get legislation passed. So we all are aware of how ineffective Congress can be at getting legislation done. So whenever you can go different routes, that is preferable. So you always want to think creatively about how you can address those issues. After that, we still had the second half of the policy that we had to get done. And timing is everything sometimes. The Ice Bucket Challenge happened to start right in the middle of this effort. And it created a great opportunity to raise awareness. And the reality is like everyone in life, members respond to incentives. And too often, the incentives in DC are about how I get on cable news and yell and scream at each other, and that the incentives are not really aligned to work together and get stuff done on bipartisan legislation. It might sound crazy, but that's the reality. And there's a lot more bipartisan work that goes on than people realize, but it's not covered. And it doesn't drive volunteers to campaigns and donors and TV coverage. And so the Ice Bucket Challenge is an example, and tweeting and putting out, writing letters of thanking members and talking about your issues publicly. That's what provides the incentive beyond your amazing personal stories for the members, for the staffers to take action. I don't want that to sound too cynical, but it is important to know that, where getting that out, no matter if you agree with them on every issue or not, thanking them when they do something publicly is what keeps the ball moving forward and continues to build interest in doing something on your issues, and then on that current issue and future issues. And the Ice Bucket Challenge was one way that people said, oh, this is great. And I'm sure some of the cynical press folks out there were saying, how do we get our own attention on this? And it was advocates saying, well, by the way, we have this issue that's going on. We need to address it. Third thing, incremental progress is what normally happens, is often the best thing that happens, and to not get discouraged about that. It's, talking about the different asks that the ALS Association is pushing right now. Those are all reasonable, sort of incremental asks. Too many times people come in and they have aspirational asks, which are great, but it's very difficult, almost impossible to get that done. So when you come in with something that is incremental in nature, and then you have an ability to make incremental progress, it's more likely to get happen. Again, on the Steve Gleason Act, because of, quote unquote, the cost of it, we weren't able to remove stop the CMS policy permanently at first. We had to take incremental progress where I think it was for a year, we stopped the CMS policy, but we were able to come back. And because of your continued advocacy, we were able to get it permanently addressed. So keep that in mind, that the incremental progress matters. One fact that I forgot to mention when we're talking about building a relationship with staff, most staff handles about 5 or 6 issues. So when you're going into a meeting, it might be 15 minutes, maybe you're lucky to get 30 minutes. They maybe had, when I handled healthcare for Eric, I also handled foreign policy, law enforcement, including his human trafficking portfolio, agriculture, and everything healthcare related. So I would go from one meeting where I'm talking about Middle East policy to the next meeting I'm talking about crop insurance, to the next meeting I'm talking about ALS research, and then I could be going, it still might be healthcare related, but it could be stabilizing the individual market with the ACA. And so that's what the schedule is like even for a staffer when they're jumping from meeting and meeting. So when you come in, that's why it's important to have crisp, incremental, reasonable asks, because you're trying to break through all that noise and all those jumping arounds from different meetings to say why your issue is important, which speaks to the personal stories. The people watching this, the people in this room have some of the most powerful personal stories. And though it doesn't seem like it, the staffers and the members out there, they're just normal people, like all of us. And so when you share the very difficult, scary personal stories, it truly resonates with folks and they want to help. And so I think sharing that to the extent people are comfortable, as difficult as that is, it really emphasizes the struggle that people living with ALS are going through and why you all are there and why they need help. And so facts and figures are great, but that's what people really want to respond to is your personal stories. Lastly, it takes a while to get stuff done, but it does eventually pay off. From continuing to get the research dollars slowly over time bumped up to Gleason Act, to the progress being made on the Social Security disability issues. Every time you go out there, yes, it's difficult. Yes, it gets frustrating, but you do make incremental progress. And often things do get done, especially with the work of this great chapter and the national chapter. A lot of other disease groups aren't as lucky to have such good people, locally, leadership locally and out in DC. So just continue to stay positive and continue to do that advocacy because it does make a difference, and it certainly made an impact on me when I was out there working, and continue to feel passionate about it because of all the advocacy and work you guys did. So I'll be happy to answer any other questions during the Q&A, including all the, ridiculous, why does this work this way in DC stuff or gossipy stuff. But hopefully that is helpful in terms of how the DC works and why your advocacy is important. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for that was great. One of the things that we do here at the chapter is we really work with our ALS community throughout Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota to send people to DC for this trip to share their personal stories. And we are so fortunate today to have Don and Candy Howard here, who came out with us this past June. And I think, Don went crazy in the halls of Congress. He was just everywhere, but fantastic. And he is willing to share what that experience was like for him. And so I'm gonna welcome you, Don, to come on up.
All right.
And I think you got the mic. Okay. I'll grab that. You got it? Okay.
Good morning. It's good to be here today. It really is. I would be remiss if I did not begin by thanking again Jen and Henry for having the foresight and the willingness to send my wife and I to the Advocacy Conference this summer in Washington, D.C. What an experience that was. We had an opportunity not only to hear some incredible good news about what's going on in the area of research and development for some of our drugs. Also, we heard some outstanding speakers that not only made us laugh, it brought us to tears at times. And then, of course, there were the stories that we had an opportunity to hear from people like Candy and I are dealing with this disease on a daily basis. And it was a sad story to hear sometimes. And the willingness for those people to come, like Candy and I did, and share their story was just unbelievable. You know, I'm a retired Lutheran pastor. I was told I had 5 minutes. And I've also been told that there's never been a bad short sermon. So I'll try to keep this short. Candy will tell you that we came from Oklahoma, so we're new to this area. I've only been here less than a year, and we came here for the health care. In Oklahoma, there was not a clinic close enough for us to go to. So when we came here, we had not only a clinic at the University of Minnesota, but we also had this fabulous association here supporting people in such a wonderful way. However, when I first got here, Candy will tell you, I didn't want to come to support group meetings. I didn't want to sit around with a bunch of sick people because I didn't feel like I was sick yet. You know, after a while, I decided maybe, just maybe, if I go, I'll give somebody an opportunity to smile. They didn't have that chance. I like to tell stories. And guess what? It worked. I've got a few friends there now that look forward to seeing me every time I come. And the interesting thing about ALS is the fact that it affects different people differently. Some may lose their chance to speak or opportunity to speak, like my best friend that I have at the support group meetings now. He can't speak anymore. Some lose their ability to walk, like me. Some can't use their arms. Well, that friend of mine who can't speak, guess who can? I can. And guess who used to get paid to speak? I did. And guess who is now ready to speak on the behalf of those people who cannot speak for themselves? I am. I am ready to be an advocate for this group of people. I'm one of them. I've seen how powerfully messages that are delivered to the folks on the Hill can move those people. I remember the last group we went to was, I think, Representative Peterson. And there was a young lady who had never heard about ALS or anything, who was a staffer. We've been telling our stories all day. And Ryan, what's Ryan's last name?
Tofflant.
Ryan is a young man who has 2 young children. And I heard his story every time that we told ours. And it really got to me. And so in my last opportunity, I think I did my best job because I broke down. And I said, I don't want to see families with young children have to grow up without their mom or dad. We need your help. We need your help in making certain that that doesn't happen at some point in time. And so, you know, that story, that staffer got teary-eyed. So did I. That's okay. We're here to try to help one another in the best way we can, to be advocates, to stand up and be counted. Oh, I can't stand up. I did it fall down. I am just so happy that I made the decision to come and be a part of this group. I hope that I can add something to the efforts that we are putting forth here. If I can in some small way, it'll be well worth my time and effort. And that, as the other speakers indicated, I'll be happy to share any information I can with anyone who may have questions for me at the end. thank you all for allowing me to come today, even though I had to get up really early. A lot of support. Thank you very much.
Do you want to stay up here for a little bit?
I guess. I'm going anyway.
I don't like following you.
That's all right.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And I want to welcome Calaneet and Matt to come back up. So if anybody here has questions, and if anybody on the live stream has questions, they can type them in. You're probably monitoring that.
And if I could ask the three of you, as you answer questions, to repeat them into the microphone, that helps for the live stream.
Okay.
Okay. Does anybody in the room have any questions? David.
I was just wondering, what is the process that you go through in your own mind when you're moving from one candidate or one representative to another as that representative either retires or loses his position?
Can you repeat the question?
The question is, what is the process like for dealing with the fact that as members either lose or retire or move on? You're saying from an advocacy standpoint or from a staff?
From a personal standpoint, you went through that with Paulson.
Yeah, so I didn't work for Eric at the time he lost, but it's a great question. I mean, as a staffer, your job security is tied to that member being elected. And so what ends up happening is it's very unceremoniously, about a week after the election, and I still had friends and old colleagues that worked for him when he lost, you start moving out of your office. You're sent down to a cubicle with one phone, and the staffers are each given sort of a shift to come in and take, a few hours where they're answering the phones, and you just slowly get more and more confined to a smaller space and don't have the ability to do very much at that point. And when they're not doing that, the majority of people are searching for jobs. And it is, it's what makes our democracy great, is that you can have those peaceful transitions, but yes, there are real world impacts to that happening on people's lives. So I've got some former colleagues that worked for Eric, they're still looking for jobs. And it's the, what do you want to do after that? You can try and go to a new member, and continue to work. You can try and go to an advocacy organization. You can, leave and go back to where you're from. It depends on sort of what you want to do. But I think the toughest thing is when it's kind of a wave election, as I would say 2018 was, the pool of existing congressional staffers looking for jobs, and normally it's going to be Republicans are going to go to Republican offices, is going to be heavy towards one party. So in other words, this year you have a whole bunch of Republican House staffers all trying to maybe get back on the Hill in a different office, but you didn't have very many new House Republicans or Republicans in general. And so now, the pool of candidates is bigger, the number of jobs is smaller. And then the downside from the lobbying advocacy perspective is, you want people with connections to whoever is in power. And so the quote unquote value of a former House Republican staffer is now less because the Republicans are no longer in charge in the House. So it's a cyclical thing that can be very difficult, because when you lose, it's normally in those types of wave election situations, and so your opportunities really diminish, even if you've done a very good job.
What happens during this transition period after the election but before the new candidate takes office? Does advocacy just kind of halt?
The follow-up question was what happens in between the election and the new member coming in and to advocacy. It depends on the year, but usually after an election, the last month and a half is quite dead. There could be some government funding, some necessary things that have to happen, but I think most people don't do a whole lot during that time because you have the member transitions going through, that are going on, and there's also, I think, sort of that idea of these members have already lost. Do we want to have them continue to vote on stuff? So usually that's a dead period. And then the hard part is for advocates, when you come in, new members, they've got to hire staff, they got to get office space. Some of them have no idea what they're doing or what the process is. And so it can take a few months to get going. So you can try and come in as an advocate in February or March. Maybe the member has just found out what committee they're on. They might not be fully staffed up. So, I mean, it is a rough transition. And then they got to run a year and a half after that. So.
Question is maybe for Calaneet, do you know, or potentially we don't even know, when some of the next bills are going to be up for vote? Like, when is the SSDI waiting period up next? And also maybe the CMS. I know that you said it passed in the House, but now needs to go to the Senate. Do we know a timeline for those?
Yeah, so the question was if I knew the timeline of when the votes may or may not happen in the Senate around SSDI and some of the other bills. The answer is no, I don't. They're sitting in committee, and so we're still looking at how many members have signed on, if we have any kind of poll. As far as DOD, I think that's what you might be referring to, not CMS, the Department of Defense research. That will come up, it usually comes up in the next couple of months or so. I don't have a time frame yet as to when that will happen. My experience over years, again, many different communities actually get this kind of funding. In my past organization, we also receive this kind of funding. And my experience has been that the DOD money itself kind of turns into a little bit of a horse trade at the end, and when the Senate's making deals on other things. So I would fully expect that to happen in the next couple of months, but I don't know yet. And since we've asked for doubling of the money, we are not the only group that has asked for that in the Department of Defense CDMRP program. So we'll see if there's any kind of strong response to it. It's actually not a lot of money, as you know, but it is something that can kind of be traded back and forth to amend other issues that some of the members are dealing with. And I actually wanted just to add on to your point, when as an organization, when we see changes in staff, it's really important that then we're equipped to meet the needs of those changes. So we are very focused every time an election happens on reaching out to new members, reaching out to new staff, educating them as soon as possible before anybody comes into Washington. We do a smaller fly-in in the spring, but our team will start going to the Hill and start meeting with staff one-on-one and start meeting with members to try to bring them up to speed on the issues that are important to us. So we try to give everyone a little bit of time. We usually send them a welcome letter and things like that, and reach out to them, recognizing that they have 50,000 things that are coming at them from groups like ours and others that have all the different issues that we were just discussing. So that's something that's always in progress after every election.
So we have a number of questions coming in live stream and via social media. The first one is, not everyone can make it to DC to talk to the representative. What's the most effective way to advocate at the grassroots level? What has the largest impact?
Do you want to take that? Do you want me to take it? Okay.
The question was, if you can't make it to DC, what has the largest impact from an advocacy standpoint with member offices? There are lots of techniques that people use. They use email campaigns, they use phone calls, they go to town halls or events. I would say first off, the most underutilized in my mind is request a meeting in your home state, your home district. Members are often looking to do meetings back in their district, and they appreciate people putting in a meeting request. And you can often meet with the member during that time. But I find that to be the most effective because you're having a conversation and you're sitting down and you can really dive into it versus the 2-minute snippet that's often scripted in a town hall, or an email campaign where it's all the same email and it goes into a batching queue and you're recording more numbers than anything. I mean, Eric signed every single letter that he sent out. There are a lot of offices, or so he would see everyone that went out. There are a lot of offices, they're using an auto pen. And they're seeing the numbers because of just the mass number of emails. So I think phone calls are more effective. It's hard sometimes to break through, but to do a phone bank, as awful as it can be as a staffer, can be effective because you're getting the repetition of calls, and the member all of a sudden says, what are we getting all these calls about? And when you're able to say, oh, it's about ALS research, that's gonna resonate with the member because they're saying, oh, wow, I'm hearing a lot. So I'd say that and requesting a meeting in your state office, which every member has. Sometimes they have many if it's a big sprawling district, but those are the two I would recommend over an email campaign.
This is a question for Don. This person is wondering, is DC tough to navigate for people with mobility challenges? Were the buildings accessible?
They were quite accessible. We didn't have any problem whatsoever. And they were ready for us. I'm not sure they were ready for me, my little scooter that I had, a little more gas than I needed. I turned it over once, and I got a lot of attention, but no, they make every effort to make certain that there are no problems getting to the Hill and to all the meetings that we had. They were very helpful.
And then question for Calaneet, actually. This person is asking, should we talk to our chapters about advocacy training beyond what happens at the conference?
So the question was, should we talk to our chapters about advocacy training beyond what happens at the conference? I look at Jen. Yes, you absolutely should. There are, as I was just saying, there are so many things that can be done here on a local level and even on a state level. So talking with your chapters about how that might happen, how to go visit some of the state offices, perhaps, going to some of the town hall meetings and really trying to put some plans together, very, very valuable. And if you want to do some efforts on a state legislative effort, that's, again, a long game, just like a federal is, but very important if you have the opportunity to do it. So I would say absolutely yes. And thank you to whoever wrote that question.
Are there any other, is that good? Okay. Is there any other questions from the room? Yeah, Jordan.
So I think there's a number of organizations that probably do this type of training, know to make an incremental ask, have very personal stories. You talked about going from foreign policy to domestic policy to healthcare. What is it that we're doing that is moving the needle? I mean, there's so many organizations that have passionate people and do it well. And why do you think we're making progress now?
You're asking me?
I don't care who answers.
I can take a swing at it. And so Jordan asked, what do you think? There are a lot of organizations that do the work that we do, that train the way that we train, making sure that we're making reasonable incremental asks and being consistent and straightforward. And what is it that we're doing that might differentiate and actually move the needle? So from my experience, it is that consistency. When I've been in Washington for 15 years, and when I see organizations that I've known for a very long time that are moving the needle like this one, it's usually consistency. It's the fact that the people come back, they continue to make the asks, they continue to go forward, that training is always there, and they don't move off of that opportunity. They also work in coalition. We work in coalition with so many organizations, not just ALS organizations and not just organizations in the neurodegenerative space, but all across the sector. And we work very tightly with them, and so we also try to be very consistent on how we're all approaching Capitol Hill at different times. So that's been my experience on this side of the house, but you might have some other thoughts.
I would say part of it is your leadership. When you have good leaders, as you do have, who have that clear mission and are very, have that consistency and develop the personal relationships, that makes all the difference in the world. Because ultimately, it is a little bit of a crapshoot in terms of how you break through. It is, you're having March fly-ins is a phrase that they use on the Hill, and that means it's because it's appropriation season, and you're having all these different advocacy groups come in to, many of them are disease patient focused groups, and they're all asking for additional money. And so it is hard sometimes to break through and separate yourself. And I think it's the personal stories. I've always found that the ALS community does a better job in sharing their personal stories. It's that consistency, and then it's the leadership.
Awesome. Well, thank you to all of you for sharing your insights. You guys did great. Can we get a round of applause? And I think what all the information that they have shared really underscores why we as an organization need to continue fueling our efforts around advocacy and really using that to break down barriers to get to those meaningful treatments and a cure.
I have a question.
Well, then I have an answer.
Has there been any thought given to doing something on the level of the Ice Bucket Challenge again? I know they did something recently about pie in the face.
We did.
We tried that.
Do you want me to put a pie in your face now? Is that what you're asking?
Well, I could, as long as there's something in it. No, I'm just wondering.
So the question was, have we ever thought of doing something like the Ice Bucket Challenge
I mean, it really
again?
fits
It did really take off. So, and this month, as you all might know, is the 5-year anniversary of the Ice Bucket Challenge. And one of the reasons the Ice Bucket was so incredibly successful is that none of us came up with it. We didn't sit in a conference room and come up with, I so wish I would have come up with that idea. But it was a grassroots effort that really took off, and kind of like Congress, it's kind of a crapshoot on how that, yeah.
Trying to figure out what can we do to follow up on that.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've really been working on this summer is our Challenge Me campaign, and really trying to empower individuals to take on their own challenge of how they want to attack ALS. And we have had a lot of success with people taking pie in the face in our area. So I wasn't kidding. I'll happily do that.
She did it. I haven't done it.
I like it. But really, as everybody's got their own what they can do to really support this cause and push us forward. So yeah, I would encourage anybody who wants to take on their own campaign to do that. Because what we did learn from the Ice Bucket Challenge is that when you infuse millions of dollars into research, progress will be made. We've had multiple genes that have been identified since the Ice Bucket Challenge. As Calaneet referred, we have more drugs in phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials than we've ever had before. And it is not an accident. I mean, it's very simple math. And that's actually, thanks for kind of teeing me up. As we close out this morning, as we look at all of the ways that we are focused on our mission, we invite you to help support us in that. And if you want to make a gift today, there are cards that'll be passed around. And for those of you that are joining us via live stream, there's actually a link on the YouTube channel to make a donation. But you can support our advocacy efforts, our care services area, or directly to ALS research. And I do want to point out that if you do want to make a gift to ALS research, there is a match on the table, thanks to our very generous donors, Christy and Larry Waite. All new and increased gifts to ALS research will be matched dollar for dollar up to $10,000. So what that means is if you've never made a gift to research before, your gift will be matched 100%. If you have made a gift to research before, first of all, thank you. And second of all, any increase over last year's gift would be matched through this very generous offer. Thank you, all of you, for being here, and for those of you that are joining us on the live stream. We are just thrilled to be able to have you here and to be able to have this conversation. Another huge thank you to our guest speakers for being willing to share their expertise and their story. I know we'll all be around if you have additional questions or want to chat further and would like, no one's leaving until those Danishes are gone. So just need to be clear about that. But thank you all for being part of our mission and really being on our team to rid this world of ALS. Really appreciate it. Have a great day.